All right, I'm Josh LaCount, and I'm here with award-winning film and television composer Tom Howe. How you doing?
I'm all right. Thanks for having me.
Good man. Thank you for being here. I am so excited to talk to you, man. Like, there's so many things I want to ask you, so I figure we'll just hop right into it. Um, where did it all begin? Like, when did you first start composing? Like, when did you know you want to be a composer? I know that's like a hard question, but
Well, probably in music. I was at a school in England from the age of 7, like a choir school. And in those days, there was no internet, phone or any of that stuff. And so the only way I could communicate with my parents was to write letters. And I was playing the piano from a very young age. My dad played organ in church and stuff. And
okay.
but he used to, at that point, I took up the guitar. And there was a thing in the UK called Top of the Pops, which was a big kind of show where every week they would play the number one, the top 40 sort of songs on the radio on BBC. And he used to write out the weekly number one for me in notation, and then he would post it to me in a letter. And I would get the letter
What?
once a week, and then I would learn the song on the piano or the guitar. And then I would, when I saw him in the holidays or whatever, I'd play him, those sort of things. And that was probably up to that point. I'd only really had I'd obviously listened to things on the radio, but my music back had been very much a kind of classical focused, background. Everything I'd done on the piano at that point had been in a classical context. But suddenly this was sort of opening up to kind of, you know, songs and different things like that. And that really, I think, was when I thought, hang on a minute, this is good. I'm going to do something in music. And it obviously then went from there. I studied, music at school and college orchestration, things like that. But that really was the beginning of thinking, I'm going to do something with this. I mean, I didn't know at that point it would be in film or television, but I knew I was going to do something in music because I just enjoyed it so much.
Right. And so would it be safe to say like influence wise at that time it wasn't as much composers, or was it more just like all kinds of music?
It was more all kinds of things. It was really things like, David Bowie and things like that. That was more what I was kind of listening to. Then when I got a bit older, probably more early teens, I started listening to a lot of film scores. Obviously, the usual John Williams and things, but also Ennio Morricone. And
Oh
that
yeah.
probably for me, he crossed a lot of different styles really, but still had his voice. And I mean, that's something that I think everybody probably strives to achieve still. He could just kind of switch genres and yet still be totally recognizable, which I think is incredibly difficult.
Right. And so for those watching, I was gonna give them a little background here. So you've scored over 80 Emmy and BAFTA winning dramas and documentaries. You've also written several international pop 40 hits as a songwriter, which I love. I have so many things I want to ask you. This is all amazing. You've written for several major motion pictures, including Warner Brothers' Wonder Woman, Mulan, Legend of Tarzan, and then I cannot wait to get to this. Your co-score with Marcus Mumford on the award-winning TV show Ted Lasso. One of the things I wanted, you already kind of hit on with influences, where you said John Williams. What I hear when I listen to your music, I keep thinking it just feels magical. Like how movies, when I listen to like Alan Silvestri and things like that, I put you there. I like in that genre. I love it. I'm not just saying that, but I really do, and it makes me feel how movies. Because for a while, I feel like movies and music kind of went to more of like an open, not as much thematic, and I hear themes with your music. And when you start composing and you do things like that, do you have a theme in mind ahead of time with a lot of your work, or is it really different for each process?
I try to always have a theme ahead of time. I mean, it's interesting you said it because I do the things that interest me score-wise tend to be very thematic, and I love, as you said, things like Alan Silvestri, and that's where the score is based around motifs and character themes. And I
Right.
try to do that regardless of whatever the score is something like Ted Lasso, or it's something like kind of Shaun the Sheep, or it's like I try to always have a very strong um, thematic idea in mind, and then work on how I can develop that to cover different moods and genres across a whole series or film. But that's
Right.
definitely, I think about it very in a linear fashion about a tune that way rather than, I'm going to layer up a load of sounds here for the mood of this. I think about it very much in terms of the lines, the kind of tunes.
And since we're talking about Ted Lasso, it's probably one of my favorite shows. It really is, and I'm not just saying it, but it's probably changed my life in the last few years. And when I watch that show, I feel like it's a perfect combination of obviously writing, performances, but in my opinion, also music is such a key factor in any show you watch. And so like with Ted Lasso, I would love to hear how that came about. I'm sure you've answered this before, but how did you become involved and work with Marcus? And I would just love to kind of hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that was actually an incredibly fun I had worked with Bill Lawrence and Kit Kroger, who had producers on the show before. So I did a show called Whiskey Cavalier for them, which was an ABC, very different show. That was a kind of more of a drama comedy and then an action comedy thing. And then I'd also done something called Head of the Class with Bill as well. And when Ted came along, Jason was, producing that, starring in it, writing it, doing the whole thing. And he's great friends with Marcus. And so he wanted Marcus to do the score. And Bill said, well, that sounds great. Should we put him together with Tom? Because Tom's got, experience to picture. Obviously, Marcus has got huge experience in music and, band sounds and all the rest of it. So he and I got put together and had breakfast in LA in a hotel one day. And we got on really well. And he said, why don't you just come over and hang out and we'll just write something? So I then got on a plane from LA to Devon, which is in the sort of right on the tip of England, down on the kind of coast. And I basically went and hung out there for like 10 days. And that often composing is very solitary. You sit in your room and you kind of, you're trying to come up with thoughts, but it was more like making a record, really, which I'd obviously had some experience back doing many years before. But we would meet 9, I was obviously staying there, wake up in the morning, have breakfast, go into the studio. What are we trying to do? What have we got? And it was like bouncing ideas around very much in a kind of songwriting fashion. And at that point, we didn't have any footage because the whole thing was delayed with COVID. The whole thing was delayed at that point, not because of COVID. COVID hadn't really kicked in at that point, but they were just delayed. And then we had no footage, but we had the scripts. So we kind of read the scripts. Marcus had talked to Jason. And so he had more of a kind of inside track on what Jason was wanting. And so we decided it was going to be transatlantic. And so for the first time ever, and certainly in my career, we wrote the main title first. I nearly always write that not at the first. I try and write it once I've pulled in some ideas and then I work out how to kind of smash them together. But we went out first and said, here it is. Here's a song. What do you think? And they all said, well, that sounds great. And then we went off and did some action stuff, some comedy stuff. I then flew back to LA and then he was meant to come and stay with me out there. And then sadly, COVID then did kick in and then we were all remote from that point on. But we'd had that kind of 10 days together. It's always better to be in a room with someone. So it was bouncing ideas off and we worked out what each other's strengths were and, how we could kind of help each other best, I think. And, I learned a lot from him. Hopefully he, picked up something from me too. I don't know. I found it fascinating being with him and coming at it from a kind of more of a kind of band record angle,
right,
from my sort of, solitary composer angle. So it was great fun. And then, we came up with some themes there. We had ideas about instrumentation, how we were going to record. And, for instance, one of the things that we did there was we decided to record the piano stuff, but kind of quite noisily. So we started in a way where you hear a lot of the piano still moving and the pedal sound as well as the. Now, when you're recording for a film, you usually try and minimize those things because you're trying to, hear.
Right.
But we made a conscious effort to make it sound a bit rough and ready, and we wanted to hear more of that. So the mic was lower than you would normally have it. We're taking a blend of different mics to get more of that kind of edge, and that's sort of, that kind of thought process is an interesting one, and we had a lot of fun on it.
Now, when you say you recorded the main title, do you mean the intro song or do you mean the score the score.
The song, we did the song straight off the
Okay,
bat.
so my question is, which I love that it's all amazing. I have actually, for like the last year and a half, I do a lot of writing. When I write, I listen to the Ted Lasso soundtrack all the time. So when you came up, that thematic, recurring dun 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 dun, that right there, I'm telling you, man. Even now, when it hits me, I'm telling you, it's so good, and I love that so much that it's in everything from what is it, 1991 to all the different little like variations of it. How is that part of that 10-day thing where you were like, we came up with that stuff in that 10 days and kind of like stuck to that?
Yeah, and then I mean, we had that became sort of the theme of the show, really, and Ted's theme, and yeah, we manipulated it to be, you know, sad, happy, and, you know, funny, and whatever it needs to be. But, you know, it's funny, those little kind of nuggets of, as you say, you know, it's a very simple tune, that, but it's hard to come up with those. And in a way, that the more, I mean, talking about John Williams, but he always says, you know, the tune needs to be simple enough that you can kind of remember it without the harmony and stuff going on underneath, because that's the bit you're going to hum. So if you write a kind of tune that's very chromatic and it's got a very odd rhythm, it's going to be difficult for somebody to kind of, you know, hum that when they're kind of going to get their coffee. And by having it be, that tune's quite sort of, it's a diatonic tune. It's very much in a kind of in one key, you know. So therefore, you know, I can take it and move it around to be in lots of different emotions. So you hear it in kind of, I mean, as you say, all over the show. It crops up in different guises. And
it's so good, man. It's so good. And another thing I wanted to ask you is, when you're scoring, you said you had the script first, right? So when you went to season 2, were you still only basing it off of the script, or were you able to see, I guess my question would be, when you're looking at a scene that's, let's say it's really sad, and you're like, okay, do I want to put music over this moment, or do I want to, enhance it, or is that something that you guys would make that call, or is that something that you guys would just send off, or like, how does that work?
Well, when in the normal process, I mean, as I said, it was a bit unusual because it was delayed first time round, and then but season 2, I generally I got all the scripts actually, which I read ahead of time, and you can then know, okay, I'm going to need a theme for this character who's, not been so featured in season 1, or I knew I was going to need a theme for Roy and Jamie. There were some other themes that were then needed, which you can get that from the scripts, but we then get sent a kind of rough cut of the episode, and then we'll watch it, and then we'll say,
okay,
probably we need music here, probably we need music there. What do you think? What should it be doing? How, So you kind of think about it before you have a go at it. But those cuts are forever changing and in flux. But the amazing thing about Ted Lasso, in truth, is that Jason, has such an outline of what it is going to be, that he was saying things in season 1 about stuff that was going to happen midway through season 2.
Love it.
The dad and darts cue in episode 7 of season 1, he said that's going to come back he's going to be melting down in season 2. He's going to be talking about his dad, and that we need this to be related. And actually, after that cue, 1991, you mentioned, it goes into the dad and darts cue from episode 7. But that, having that kind of overall view of a show is quite unusual, because often you make a series and season 1's a hit, and then you go, oh god, we've got to do a second one now, because you don't know the first ones. But it was very much outlined in his in his kind of overall process of the entire arc of what he wants to do. So that's also helpful, because
right,
that's going to be important. I need to do something here that's going to be able to recur over there.
You said dad and darts. I instantly got chill bumps, because that's one of my favorite scenes in that show. I mean, like, everything it talks about, from being, people underestimating you, and overcoming all of that, the music, the guitars, how it just slowly comes in with the guitars. And it really is a show, empathy, kindness. And I feel that in the music, and I feel that throughout, at least from just as a viewing it, it feels like everyone involved really cares about the show, the cast, the music, the composing, everything. And you can feel it And it's honestly been, I mean, I've, just by looking online, you can see how much it's changed people's lives. And now it's up for Emmys and more. And congratulations on all of that, by the way. I know, you know, there's just so much work that goes into it, and it's definitely amazing.
Well, I think, as you said, it's one of those, that scene and the rest of the show, but, you know, the writing's brilliant, the acting's brilliant. And as you say, it's authentic, you know, and, you know, from a music point of view, we decided to record everything, you know, for real. And that is not always the case on TV because the picture's changing all the time. So you might find you write something and then you wake up tomorrow and they've cut a really horrible amount out of it. And you basically have to just re-record it. You can't just fix it within the computer. And so it's a lot more time consuming, but it makes the sound feel much warmer and more authentic too, I think. And that's what suits the picture, very much with that in mind, that there's a kind of genuine quality to the show, and therefore the music has to have that too.
Right. And I know I've got a few more things I want to talk about, but before we move on, I was going to ask you, so you can hear the influence of both of you guys in it. Marcus, you can hear kind of the instrumentation that from Mumford and stuff like that. Was that process, you know, different? I know you said it was a little bit different from obviously scoring with a huge orchestra. It's more like a studio, recording music in a studio. Is there anything that stands out that was just something that was a lot of fun to do, or, you know, when it comes to instrumentation? Because I hear so many different elements. It sounds like there's like mandolins, or maybe it's, you know, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, so the mandolins, I mean, that's that sound is very much, as you say, a Marcus influenced thing. But the fun thing really about, you know, when I first went to his house and said it all being authentic is that, you know, often I'm, as I said, I'm stuck in my room and I need a synth, and I load up a kind of plugin within the computer that emulates a synth, right? He's got all these things just in a cupboard next door. So, you know, there's a moment where I go, oh, well, maybe we could try and move back. Hang on. And he goes, he's got that exact thing, vintage one from kind of, you know, the year that and he plugs it in. It sounds incredible. And even the kind of atmospherics in the guitar, you know, whereas you might try and, you know, you find a pad and thing and you'll mess around with reverbs in the computer. All those sounds are pedal boards all chained up within the studio that are then recorded with a microphone, you know. And so, you know, that kind of way of, because, you know, from me, I'm going often from my computer to then record something after the event. But he's, you know, when you're making a record, you're making this, you know, you're not making a demo to then play to somebody who says, oh, we can then record that. You're just making the finished thing, and either someone's going to like it or they're not. You know, in TV and film, you can write it and then you go, hey, here it is, guys, and they go, we hate it, you know. But when you make a record, you can do whatever you like, and then basically the public decide whether they want to buy it or not. But you just make it. Right? So that is interesting because he's, as I said, he's just got this collection of guitars and, you know, pedals and old synths and, you know, even the drum kit, the way he's got that mic'd up, that's very much a kind of scaled down drum kit, which is very much part of his sound, you know. So yeah, it was great.
That's awesome. And now on the opposite scale of that, I'm assuming that something like, I wanted to hit on this, The Mating Game, which for those watching, this is a David Attenborough narrated documentary series. And this is something that you scored. I'm sure it's probably different. Do you like score, like first when, you know, at home, do you write it out first, then go with a live orchestra?
Yeah, so that's a good example where everything in that show, I write it at, you know, in here in the studio, and then I program it and I make a demo that sounds like hopefully like the finished thing. And then they go, okay, we signed off on it. And then I go to, in that case, I was at Air Studios in London, and I had a 50-piece orchestra, which I recorded, you know, I actually have to say that was a COVID thing too, in that you weren't allowed to. Often on a film, we record strings and brass separately and percussion, and we do everything individually, and then the mix brings it together. But because of COVID, you weren't allowed to swap any of the players over. So I couldn't do strings in the morning and brass in the evening because I wasn't allowed to. So I just had everything play at the same time, which to me is much better. And that's much more the John Williams, Ennio Morricone way. It means that they can't then decide the trumpet's too loud because bad luck with everyone else. But that made the Mating Game is the orchestra just playing it. That's exactly as it sounded in the room. There's no, you couldn't change anything. But yeah, in that case, my demos are done, and then they say, great, let's record it. And by the time I get to recording, I know in a way that's the fun bit, because it's approved, and now I'm just having a good day out.
Right.
And, you know, it's going to sound better, and I'm in the studio.
Right.
That's a happy.
So I'm curious, when you're writing that, do you get to watch like the praying mantis beforehand, all that stuff? Like, and because I was noticing one where it's like, you know, like, okay, he's talking, they're introducing the characters. I look at it like you're watching a movie. You got the both praying,
Yeah.
and then it pounces and the music changes and you're suspense. Do you get to watch that ahead of time, or is that something that you have to go again by a script?
Yeah, no, I get watch it ahead of time, but again, it's a moving thing. So I write it, and then 2 days later they've lengthened it or shortened it, or that bit's got longer and that bit's got. So as you're going forwards, 2 steps forwards, you're sort of going half a step back each day as well. So you never quite progress. The thing that is funny though is that, you know, David's voice is incredibly musical, and
right.
One of the things I find myself doing is when I get to the end and I finally hear his voice on it, because when I first get the pictures, it's usually one of the producers or the director in who's just speaking, and they make no effort to make it dynamic, or, you know, it's usually clipped and it's way too loud and then it's too quiet, and, you know, and there is going, the mantis, you know, there's no it's the most uninspiring thing you've ever heard. And they'll all admit to that and laugh. But when David's voice does come on and it's so musical, I find myself then muting things within my music to make space.
Oh.
Because he's got such a kind of, you know, when he's talking, you just don't need as much going on, you know. So that's interesting for me, and that you're always, music to picture is always serving a high purpose, right? And his voice is obviously, in those instances, is more important than my music. So I'm giving that feeling behind it, but you've got to hear what he's going to say. So I find, as I said, when the producers are on there, I'm throwing everything in because I want to make it sound interesting. And then he comes on, you go, oh, it doesn't need music, you know. So that was a good learning, you know, experience for me. But yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Well, I love it. I was listening to that the other day. Again, it's like, I love scores in general. I sometimes listen to them as like soundtracks throughout my day. So it's like, I listen to all the different records. So like, it is magical. And I say that, I know it sounds cheesy to say, but it just reminds me of how movies kind of used to feel and take you on a journey. And I guess, I know we're trying to cover a lot here, but I wanted to really touch on as well. You've worked with Rupert Williams, which I have so many different things to talk about. But my question was, so on Wonder Woman, which I love that whole score. Remember how Zack Snyder had the Wonder Woman theme beforehand, correct? So my question is, so like, because it's kind of like a 3-part question, and feel free to ask me to repeat it if I'm asking too many questions, but did that influence that record? Did you guys have to kind of take from that to do that? And then how did that record influence Professor Marston? Because I feel like I'm wondering, I just kind of feel like there had to be connection.
So what Professor Marston and Wonder Woman were in the same year for me. And so that was interesting. But the answer is, so I think is Batman versus Superman, wasn't it? That, so Hans wrote a sort of kind of electric cello theme for, you know, Wonder Woman, which has become associated as her tune. When we got to the movie, Rupert then wrote a kind of origin theme for Diana, because at that point she hadn't become Wonder Woman. So in a way, we were sort of not that, because the Hans thing is obviously brilliant, but it's totally, you know, in order for Rupert to kind of put his mark on it, he was fortunate that in a way the film was about, you know, a lot about her kind of growing up and into that role.
Right.
And so there was another tune that was kind of like the growing up theme, if you like. And then, but one of the first things I did on that film was take the Hans's tune, and I tried to, you know, arrange it in different ways, really. You know, on sort of more traditional instruments. And then that theme sort of creeps in throughout the movie underneath in a couple of spots. And then as you get near the end of the movie, I think she's having her, you know, the main battle, and she becomes, you know, one of them. You hear that theme absolutely as it was in Batman versus Superman, where she suddenly found her strength and she's off and doing her thing. And then the themes come full circle, and it's now the Wonder Woman theme, which is what you hear obviously in the follow-up 1984 or whatever, that's playing from the off, you know. But yeah, I think we were lucky that it was a kind of origin story, so it didn't have to lean into that from the off, if you know what I mean.
Oh yeah, because it was before. Got it. Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes sense.
And then in terms of Professor Marston, I mean, that was a standalone thing. I mean, I'm sure there are harmonic things that I tend to lean into and things like that, which probably just from things I like tonally. But they weren't related in terms of melody or chords. And that one's really a bit more. Wonder Woman is a very sort of symphonic score with synths and it's quite a big sounding score. And Professor Marston kind of gets big at the end, but it's more neoclassical, really, sort of very sort of light, more chamber sounds and kind of
Right.
And a bit more classical, I suppose.
Right.
Yeah, but I enjoyed working on both of those, and lucky working with Rupert, and who I've worked with before a few times on Tarzan and some other things, and Angela Robinson, the director on Professor Marston, she's just brilliant. So yeah.
And how does it, when it comes to something like Mulan, when you're having to score based on songs that were in, if I remember correctly, it was like the original. You were kind of putting the instrumentation, but you weren't using the songs from the original, and you're working with a lot of people on that. How does that differ from? I mean, obviously it's different from working alone, but like for something like Mulan, such a big project, is that a really complicated process, or?
It was. I mean, Mulan again was affected by, because COVID. Then, I mean, even just on the release of that, it was meant to come out in December, and they pushed
that's right.
March or April for a kind of bigger release, and then of course everything shut down on March whenever, and then they said it was going to. At that point, we all thought it was 2 weeks, and we're going to be out the other side type thing. So it was pushed to June, and then it got pushed, and then eventually it became Disney Plus. But on that one, I was working with Harry's brother Rupert. With Rupert's brother Harry, rather.
Harry, okay.
And Harry wrote a great original theme for that. And then in places we lent into some of the, as you say, into the songs with kind of, a reimagining of what that might be. But it was a lot of music, that film, and I can't remember how many. It was a lot. And as I said, it then got towards the end. It was meant to be recorded in London, and then it ended up being recorded in LA because nobody could get it. And there was a lot of moving parts in that. Sometimes they go like
that. Yeah. No, it's wonderful. And a few more questions here. I know I apologize for going a little longer here. Something I want to ask you about is the Farmageddon. And I know you probably been asked this stuff a lot, but I find it fascinating. Like how do you score without dialogue? And how does it, what I've heard little snippets of you talking about it before, but just tell me a little bit about that, because that had to be a lot of fun, or at least interesting.
It is. I mean, I have to say, it's in some ways it's a dream, that, and then in other ways, when you get the opportunity, you absolutely just wish there was a ton of dialogue and sound effects so that you could, because you're just so under the microscope of being, the music being heard and needing to do a lot of the heavy lifting. And I mean, that was an interesting project for me because I did a follow-up actually for a Christmas special for as well this year, which was a half-hour thing for Netflix, the same, no dialogue. And hopefully I'll do many more, but the music, you have to start very, very early. And, when you get a kind of live action movie, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that maybe the film tests badly and they might fire a composer and hire somebody else with only like 5 weeks to go or 4 weeks to go. These things do happen. But in that instance, you get sent a film and you may have very little time, but all the kind of, if somebody's on a road having a conversation, you hear the cars and you hear the kind of wind blow, and there's already a kind of background of Foley, and there's dialogue as well, and just in general. And when you get a movie like Farmageddon, an animation like that, there is nothing. And they build everything obviously from the ground up. So if it were on a road, they got to put the cars in, and they got to put the wind in, and they got to put everything from the ground up in. And so initially, when they haven't got anything, they've just got storyboards. No one knows what's going on. So they make you start about 18. I started 18 months before I scored that, and I'm having to write music that basically tells, when they have their internal meetings or their meetings with Studio Canal, who do the studio on that one. I have to write stuff so that everyone knows what the scene is doing and whether it's a happy scene or a tense scene. And that might, by the way, then go in the bin and I don't even use it. But the music it comes on so early because it's such a kind of more dominant character than it would be, normally.
Right.
You can often watch a movie down with no music, and okay, it may not flow as well as it should, but you can kind of get the gist of the story and work out what's going on, whether it works as a piece of art or not. But you can watch it. It's with on something like that. If you watch storyboards with no dialogue, no effects,
you have
just incredibly confused. What's this?
Is it supposed to be sad?
I wrote around. It's about an 85-minute film, probably with about 75, 80 minutes of score. And I probably ended up writing around 4.5 hours of music to get to
wow.
80 minutes. And I had all my themes very, very early because they wanted that, that became, what's the theme going to be? Very, very important. We had a theme for, Agent Red and Sean and the kind of, alien. And I had those very, very early. And I would write suites, like long 5-10 minute suites for each character, where I would just try and, as we talked about earlier, I had a theme, but I would then go through cycles within a suite of like, here it is scary, here it is sad, here it is.
Gotcha.
I could snip out of that and then try to get a picture when I got a picture and see if it worked. But it was a great, Aardman are great to work for, and that was a fun project.
That's awesome. And we're coming to a close here because I'm getting my time flashing here. This is kind of a general question, but I have a lot of friends who are always, involved in film and stuff like that. And I was wondering, do you have advice for, let's say there's composers, young composers that are trying to get into composing, and let's say they don't have that project right here. They don't have the film yet or the short film or whatever it is, but they love composing. Do you have any advice, or is there, anything that you could tell them to help, to not, I know it's a general question, but, without having that project there, just to create music and to keep scoring, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. There's 3 things that have been, I think are important. One is obviously learning your, what excites you in terms of writing. As I said, for me, it's tunes and thematic, so I know that, and I work on trying to improve that. But when I was getting going in the UK, 20 years ago, whatever it was, you can either find a busy composer, which I did, and I did some work for them doing some bits and bobs, and that then led to something eventually. But I also, at the same time, there's nowadays in all over America and UK, there's a lot of music for film schools, like that do courses like Berkeley do, and you learn to write to picture. And you meet a lot of fellow composers, but everyone's trying to obviously compose, right? But you've got to meet the people who are making the films. And so I actually signed up to be on the mail list for film colleges in the UK. In those days I had to write them a letter, or ring them up, and said, look, I'm a composer, I'm looking to work with people. And I got contacted probably by about 15 people a year who were directors who'd made a short film for their final piece at college. And I would pick about 3 or 4 of those a year. And a couple of those people then went on to do TV and took me along for the ride. And I've worked with one person like 11 times.
Wow.
I think you've got to think how are you going to bump into these people who are actually the story creators, the filmmakers. And, as I said, the courses are great. You learn lots of things about the craft, which I think is very important, but you've got to also find, where am I going to meet the directors and the producers? And
right.
I actually, probably not many people go to those colleges and say, hey, I'm available to do your short film. And at that point, they're all desperate for a composer.
Right.
And you think how that synergy can work out. You look at someone like Ludwig Göransson, who goes and works with them, and then he's doing Black Panther. That's the place to start. It may not feel like it is, but you're not going to get hired on Indiana Jones 5 because John Williams is already doing it. You've got to you've got to watch the ones, the people who, and if you think they've got talent, then you've got to work with them.
Right.
And if you're talented, hopefully you'll grow together. That's my advice, I think.
Right. Awesome. And one more question is, no, it's great advice. It's a long game. And it's relationships, and it's great. My last question would be, is there a genre or a style that you'd love to dive into that might be a little different from what you've done before? Or have you already kind of touched on everything that I feel like you've kind of, done before?
I've done a lot of different things. I mean, even sort of down to kind of like hip hop on the Lego 2 movie. I've done
Right.
I would actually like to do a score that is just sort of based on guitars and possibly set somewhere kind of a bit, somewhere like Greece or something like that, or Italy or something like that. Maybe
Nice.
something, as I said, more in the kind of more in an Ennio Morricone kind of vibe. I would love to do something like that.
Outstanding. Well, thank you so much for your time. You inspire me. Yeah, and I'm sure you inspire lots of people. Your work on Ted Lasso is phenomenal. The Mating Game, so many different projects. I'm excited to hear what you've got coming, down the line. And just thank you so much.
Well, thank you for making the time. I appreciate you having me on.
Oh, no problem. All right. Well, have a great day.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.